I welcome you to part 16 of Intact. Can you believe it? We've been cruising through 1 Peter for some 16 weeks now. We took a little break last week as we celebrated Christmas, and now we're back at it. And it's been a great series thus far, has it not? Covered a ton of ground. Hopefully this has given you some things to think about, some things to work on, some things that you're focused on that you previously weren't focused on. Well, we're not done yet. And before I get too deep into where I'm going today, I got to ask you the question, is there anybody here today that you're just looking for a fresh start? You're looking for a transition, a turning point. You're kind of done with where you're at, and you're looking to move forward in life. You want a fresh start. I got one honest person in the house of God this morning. I got two. Good. Well, here's the scoop. If you're not looking for a fresh start, you're getting one anyway, because tomorrow's coming. Unless something crazy happens, and 2018 will be here, and it's a perfect time to do something different with your life. And so this morning, what I want to spend my time doing is talking to you about the power of perspective. Because I think this is something that's going to help you get a fresh start as you embark on 2018. If a fresh start is indeed what you're looking for, I'll just ask you, lean in this morning, pay attention, take some notes. Take advantage of this opportunity. And here's where I'm at. I think that our experiences, the things that we go through in life, our circumstances, I think that they depend far more on how we view them than they actually depend on what those experiences actually are. I think what happens to us is far less important than how we view what happens to us. How we see things is far more important than the things that we actually see. And I'm saying this because I think generally speaking, everybody sees the same thing. Everybody's taking in the same types of input. Everybody's experiencing relational conflict and tension and financial strain, and there's difficulty and challenge. We're all seeing the same things. We all have access to the same channels per se. We all have access to the same information. What separates us, what distinguishes one person from the next is not what they see, it's how they see it. And this is, in my opinion, why perspective is so powerful, because how you see things ultimately drives your behavior. It influences everything that you do. It influences your work ethic, the way that you navigate relationships, and whether or not you decide to stick it out or move on. It determines how you spend your time, how you spend your money, what you decide to focus on, what you decide to avoid, what you decide to pursue, and what you decide to push to the wayside. How you deal with conflict and pain and adversity and suffering and all the challenges that you're dealing with in your life. And your perspective is the one resource that you have access to regardless of what you're going through, regardless of what you're dealing with. But here is the challenge when it comes to perspective. Your perspective, my perspective, has been shaped by something. And so while our perspective helps us navigate and determines how we behave and what we do and how we perceive things, it's also shaped by what we experience. It's shaped by what we've gone through, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. And so mixed in with those good experiences, those highs, there's some real deep lows. Mixed in with the mountaintops, there's seasons where you were in the valley and you experienced trauma and abuse. You made some bad decisions. You experienced some really, really challenging outcomes. You're dealing with shame and guilt and the whole nine, and some of it's your fault and some of it's somebody else's fault, but at the end of the day, it's the reality that you face. And all of those things have shaped your perspective. They influence your perspective, the way that you see yourself, the way that you see the world around you. And I'm convinced that the intent of 1 Peter is to help people see things differently, to help people see themselves differently so that they can begin living differently. I think the 1 Peter is for people who want to just see change in their lives. They want to get over what they've been trying to get over. It's for people that want a brighter future, a bigger purpose. It's for people that are sick and tired of being sick and tired. It's for people that are caught in a broken loop and they just want to get out. I think that 1 Peter is a book written for people that want change. And I think that there's part of you that's here this morning that wants a fresh start. You want a new season in life. You want something different than what you've ever had. You're tired of your marriage failing like everyone else's, or your relationship with your kids and your extended family being filled with conflict and tension like everyone else's. And some of you are staring down the barrel of a relationship with your adult kids and you're not really sure why they don't want anything to do with you, and you want change. You want something different with regards to all that. Now, Peter, he's very familiar with fresh starts. And if you don't know who Peter is, he was one of Jesus' original 12 disciples, had front row seats to pretty much everything that Jesus did. And if you knew Peter, you knew that he had a real short fuse. He was hyper impulsive. He would swing from one extreme to the next. He'd be all in 1 minute and all out the next minute. And when we see this, because when Jesus got arrested, Peter came guns a-blazing, sword a-swinging, he's cutting ears off, and he's saying, I'm going all in, Jesus. I'll ride or die for you, with you. I'm not going to let anything come against you. Jesus tells him to throttle back. And then when Peter realizes that Jesus isn't launching the rebellion that's going to end, Rome and the enemy, he breaks camp. He cuts ties with Jesus. He starts denying that he even knew Jesus. And he turns out to be, like some of the people we've had in our lives, just a horrible friend. When the going got tough, he got going. When the rubber hit the road, he moved on. This is the same cat who told Jesus prior to all that it was ride or die. I'll take a bullet for you. I'll lay down in traffic for you before I ever deny you. Peter needed a fresh start. He needed a fresh perspective. And it was a fresh perspective that allowed Peter to get over the impulsivity and the anger issues and the commitment issues and the mood swings. It was a fresh perspective that transformed Peter's life and allowed him to end up becoming one of the most effective preachers of all time. If you remember, Peter preached the first sermon like ever. And when he did, people came out of the woodwork. They were falling on their faces, repenting and asking to be baptized. Peter effectively reached people with the message, the life-changing, transformational message of hope that comes from nowhere other than the resurrected Jesus. So in one moment he's denying Jesus, but Jesus changed all that, gave Peter a fresh perspective, gave him a new purpose, and Peter became an effective messenger of hope, of change. The perspective that Peter had changed everything. And I believe that the passage we're going to look at today can help us understand the power of perspective. And one thing that I want you to see, I'm going to try to help you see, is that a fresh perspective, I believe it's the key to a fresh start. And I also believe that it's the fuel for progress in your life. So if you're looking for a fresh start and you're looking for some progress in your life, just lean in and hear this. Turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 1. And there we see, therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same perspective, the same attitude, the same mindset, the same resolve, are some of the other translations of the word that's there, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. Look, if you're going to move from where you are to where you want to be in life, it starts with your perspective. And the big insight here that we get from this passage is that change in my life, change in your life, it only ever occurs from the inside out. And that's what Peter means when he says, arm yourself with the same perspective as Jesus. And so what I want to help you see is that a fresh perspective is the key to a fresh start, which begs the question, what was Jesus' perspective? Like, what was his mindset? What was his thought process? What allowed him to endure temptation and suffering and rejection and abandonment and disappointment and relational tension and financial strain and all of the things that Jesus was up against? What allowed him to deal with all of that without ever becoming bitter or indifferent toward God or toward people? Because I don't know if you're like me, but I'm sorry to break it to you. When I go through things like that, rejection, abandonment, being mistreated, it's hard. It's hard to not become bitter and indifferent and just outright sour towards people. But we don't see Jesus responding in that way. We see him doing things differently. His response is markedly different. He has a perspective that allows him to suffer well. He suffers with poise, and he never becomes indifferent or bitter towards God or people. And I think that Jesus' perspective was simply this: God is absolutely and utterly enough. God is enough. I think that was the perspective that allowed Jesus to suffer well. And I see that because hours prior to his execution, prior to his death, we see Jesus, he's grappling with everything that we grapple with: psychological turmoil, emotional turmoil, physical turmoil. And we hear Jesus saying that he's just overwhelmed to the point of death. And then he follows that with Father, if I don't have to do this, if there's another way, please just usher in another way. If this can pass without me having to endure what you're asking me to endure, please let that happen. But he follows that with, let your will be done. And I think ultimately what we hear Jesus saying is, God, you are enough. Jesus was able to face the greatest struggle in the history of humanity because God is enough. And because God is enough, Jesus, the righteous one, suffered once for the unrighteous ones, us, so that we could be brought back to God. And because of Jesus, we are free people. And you're not just like kind of free or somewhat free or barely free. Like, you're abundantly free. You're free from all the penalty and the punishment and the shame and the guilt for all the jacked up things that you've done to people, all the ways that you've mistreated people, misused resources, misused your life. You're free from all of that. Because through Jesus, here's what God did. He provided for everything that you and I could possibly need. Jesus is enough. And this is the fresh perspective that I believe can give you a fresh start in life. Because I'm convinced that Jesus is the way forward and the way out of whatever it is that you are dealing with. That's where Peter starts. He starts with, Jesus is enough. But where do you start? Where do you start? Maybe you start with, I'm not good enough, or I've made too many mistakes, burned too many bridges, hurt too many people. Maybe you start with how you don't have enough. You don't have enough time or resources or intellect or ability. You don't have enough opportunity. You don't have the right job. You don't have the right spouse. You don't have the right kids. You don't have the right anything. Maybe that's where you start. Or maybe you troll social media. Maybe you're a social media troll, and what that eventually does to you is it puts you in contact with somebody else's highlight reel, and that can be so depressing. When you're scrolling up and down, and all you see is celebration, and you're in your little corner, and you're just depressed because your life is not like that. Well, I'm here to tell you, the highlight reel, it's kind of like a book jacket. There are a whole bunch of other pages in that person's life story that you just don't have access to, and they're using the highlight reel to conceal it. And I'll tell you why, because that's how my life is to an extent. I've had people approach me and say something very nice. It's a compliment, and I think it's a compliment, but there's more to this. There's always more to the story. I've heard people come up to me and say, "You're such a great dad. I saw your social media, saw your Facebook or your Instagram," and I'm like, thanks. All the while, like 10 seconds after we posted that, I'm losing my mind because some kid did something to rub me the wrong way or push me to the limit. And this person's like, "You're such a great dad." And I'm like, if you only had front row seats, you might recant, but yes, I'm a great dad, thanks. I'll own that. The bottom line is, don't stop at the cover. There's more to the story. And your story is the story that you need to focus on. Because your perspective can influence the way that the way that your story plays out. Because your vantage point, it determines your vision, where you see things from. The vantage point from which you see things determines your vision for life. And for some of us, it's time to move to higher ground, get a new vantage point, and get a new vision for your life. And I think this is exactly what we see Jesus doing in John chapter 6. This is a story that a lot of people in the church world are very familiar with. It's one that if you've ever been in a Sunday school classroom, I guarantee you've heard it. It's where Jesus feeds a lot of people. And the Bible records that he fed the 5,000. And here's what's going on. A little context around this story. Jesus had been doing some work in the area around the Sea of Galilee. He'd been healing people and performing miracles. And what that led to is he had a huge following. Thousands of people were chasing Jesus wherever he was going. And eventually they get to a place where there's a stopping point. And Jesus sees this crowd. And he sees his disciples. And he's going to do something to give them a new vantage point that'll help them have a new vision for who Jesus is and what Jesus is capable of. And so he asks a question. And the question he asks of his disciples is, hey, I go buy food for all these people because I want to serve them lunch. And his disciple, the disciple that's there, he looks at Jesus and he's like, Jesus, you have got to be the worst mathematician I have ever met. Have you seen the crowd? In order to get that much loot to buy that much fruit, we'd have to work for a solid, steady 8 months straight. We don't have enough. Jesus, you don't have enough. Your cause is lost. And then another one comes up and he says, hey, Jesus, doesn't really seem like we have enough, but there's this kid in the crowd and he packed a lunch today and there's a couple of loaves of bread and some fish. And by the way, that certainly isn't enough. And all the while, the mindset there, the vantage point is these people are seeing scarcity. They're seeing this huge crowd and a scarce resource supply, and they're saying, Jesus, we don't have enough. You don't have enough. We don't see this working out. And Jesus says, tell the people to sit down. We're going to feed these people. And he talks to God, and God takes the little bit from that little sack lunch and he makes it enough. And what Jesus showed his disciples and the people that were there that day is that whatever little you have, whatever little you bring to the table, Jesus can make it absolutely and utterly enough. Because here's what happened after that. After people ate, and the Bible says they ate until they were full, Jesus took his point one step further and he said, hey guys that said we didn't have enough, I want you to go around and collect all the leftovers. And they collect 12 baskets. And maybe it's happenstance that there were 12 and there just so happened to be 12 doubters on Jesus' team, people that just couldn't see what Jesus saw. Maybe that's happenstance, or maybe that's part of the learning process for them. Because they started with, Jesus, we don't have enough. Jesus, you don't have enough. To Jesus, there was enough and some running over. You turned scarcity into supply, and we didn't even realize you could do that. That's a fresh perspective. I think you and I need a perspective like that if we want a fresh start. We need something that we can apply today, something that you can wake up with, something that you can focus on, something that you can build your life on. And here's a little something that I want you to just hear this. Take this with you. Write this down if you have to. And if you're not currently starting your day like this, please, I dare you, start your day with this, that Jesus is enough. And don't stop there, because his finished work is enough. And get this, the only eyes in the entire universe that actually matter. They see you. They see all of your pain. They see all of your guilt. They see all of your shame. They see all of your weakness. They see all of your lack, all of your scarcity. They see all of you, and they look at you like no one has ever looked at you before. They look at you in a way that you've been dying to have somebody look at you your entire life, and they see you and they delight in you. And then get this, the only voice in the entire universe, the only one that actually says anything that matters, it speaks to you and it calls you by name. And you know what it says? It says you're fully loved, you're fully accepted, I'll never stop loving you, and there is absolutely nothing that can come between us. Amen to that, right? I think this is a perspective that can change everything, because it's going to give you security beyond your circumstance. And I don't know how you view security, but here's how I view it. Security only comes from something that does not, cannot, will not go away. The only person capable of providing that level of security is Jesus. All other types of security are just a myth. Because everything you're holding on to right now, your 401k, your portfolio, everything that you have could disappear in an instant, but Jesus will never leave you nor forsake you. Jesus is enough. Knowing that Jesus is enough, that in Jesus you have enough, and that in Jesus you are enough. This is a fresh perspective that will allow you to have a fresh start. And it's a fresh perspective that if you take it with you, if you start to believe it, it'll fuel progress in your life. Let's pick up in verse 2. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. Now, I want to personalize this a little bit, because I think Peter is saying something of utmost importance. And I think what he's saying is, because of the fresh perspective that we can have in Jesus, because Jesus is enough, because in Jesus I have enough, because in Jesus I am enough, I don't have to live my life chasing after things that don't satisfy. I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to live the rest of my earthly life chasing after fleeting human desires. Peter is saying you don't have to live like that anymore. You don't have to live for the approval of people. You don't have to live up to somebody else's expectations or somebody's standards. And you certainly don't have to feel like a failure when you don't. You have a green light to live differently. You don't have to run to all the things that you run to, whether it's sex or drugs or money or power or social acclaim. Whatever it is for you that you're running to for meaning in life, you can stop. You can halt that. Peter is saying you don't have to believe the lie that anything outside of Jesus can satisfy anymore. Because Jesus is enough, you can begin making progress today. You can begin abandoning the unhealthy habits in your life, the assumptions that you're making about life that have only led you to arrive at the same dismal outcome time after time. You can start, because Jesus is enough, you can start living a life of more purpose and power than you ever have. You can live a life that matters because in Jesus you actually matter. More than you're even willing to admit, more than you could even know. Can you see this? Can you see how a fresh perspective, how a perspective that's centered on how Jesus is enough can fuel progress in your life? Well, there's other options for living, because you don't have to have this perspective, and you get to choose. You get to choose the life that you decide to live and the course that you're going to take and the next step that you're going to take. And Peter shows us that in verse 3. He says, "For you have spent enough time in the past doing what everyone else does." He uses the word pagans. He's talking about everyone else. Living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing. Can you imagine if you were there and he's like reading this out loud and then he chases it with hashtag your past in 10 words or less? Detestable idolatry. Like, this is somebody's dirty laundry list. This is somebody's life. He's just throwing it out there on the table. But he's not trying to give you a cute hashtag or a, hey, that's nice kind of thing. He's showing us a deep insight about life. He's showing us two types of people. He's showing us a transformed life in verse 2. They do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. And he's showing us a conformed life, which, by the way, takes absolutely no effort to achieve. To be conformed to what everybody else is doing, all you got to do is wake up. That's all you have to do. All you have to do is be awake. And you probably don't even have to be awake. You just have to be alive. But he's showing us two lifestyles, a transformed life and a conformed life. He's showing us two types of people, a transformer, someone who's actually making progress, and he's showing us a conformer, someone who's just on autopilot, doing everything like everyone else does. And the question becomes, what do you want to be? What legacy do you want to leave? Because you get to choose. Anybody here today want to, like, you're ready to just, you want to level up in life, you're tired of where you are? It could be something huge, it could be something small. You're just tired of something in your life and you're ready to take it to the next level. You're ready to move on, you're ready to move forward. Maybe there's a situation or there's something in your life that you just can't seem to shake. Maybe there's tension in your relationships. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's with your kids. Maybe it's with some of those extended family members that you got to spend inordinate amounts of time with over this holiday season. Good job, by the way. You smiled through it all. Really proud of you. Maybe there's relational tension, and no matter what you do, you just can't seem to shake it. You arrive at the same outcome time after time. Or maybe you just feel like you're at a dead stop in life and you are ready to start moving again. Or maybe it's another unhealthy relationship for the umpteenth time, and you know you're not supposed to be there, but you're there. Or maybe you're looking for some financial relief, some reprieve. And you're closing in at the end of another calendar year and you're balancing the books and you realize you're in the same debt cycle that you've always been in. Look, if that's where you're at, if you're ready for progress, Peter is showing us that if we really want to see progress in our lives, if we really want the next time, which I believe everybody wants the next time to be better than the last time, if that's what you really, really want, you're going to have to change the way that you think. Because if you keep entering scenario after scenario with the same perspective, you better bank on the same results. If you apply the same perspective you had the last time around, you're probably going to repeat history rather than make progress. If you want to stop living a conformed life and start living a transformed life, you need a fresh perspective. And this is exactly the same thing that Paul talked about with the church at Rome during the first century. And these are people that, like the folks that Peter's writing to, they were coming out of a cultural context that was just all out crazy. I mean, people did all kinds of things were socially acceptable. And so moving away from that was very, very difficult because when you moved away from that, you caught heat. But that's what Paul was talking about with first century Christians living in Rome. And these people needed a fresh start. They needed a fresh perspective if they were going to make any progress whatsoever in their lives. And by the way, Paul too needed a fresh perspective in his life because I don't know if you know a lot about him, but the guy, his track record, his past was one in which he did a couple of things that are just crazy if you really think about it. He imprisoned and he killed innocent people. All because those innocent people, they did nothing more than just say that Jesus paid it all of my hope, all of my trust, my life, I'm placing it in Jesus' hands. That's all they did, and Paul was imprisoning and killing people for that. Can you imagine the amount of shame and guilt that the man was dealing with? He needed a fresh start, so he's familiar with where we're at. He's familiar with where first century Christians in Rome were at. He understood the tension that exists in our lives when you're somewhere between where you were and where you want to be. And here's what he says. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Do not be like everybody else. If you want to get results that no one else is getting, you're going to have to do what no one else is doing. He says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Lean in, make an effort, have the hard conversation, make the shift, make a decision to adopt a fresh perspective. This is an active thing that you do. It doesn't just happen. If you want to see progress in your life, if you want to get over what you've been trying to get over, you're only going to get there by renewing your mind. You're only going to get there with a fresh perspective. And to do this, you're going to have to take some time. You're going to have to push pause on some things. You're going to have to take some time and try to figure out how you got there in the first place. Because whether you like to say this or not, or acknowledge this or not, you're the common denominator. I'm the common denominator. In every conflict I've ever experienced, I was there. My perspective was live and active, and it caused me to do things and say things, some of which I'm proud of, a lot of which I regret. Can you relate? You're going to have to take the time. And I'm not talking about finding somebody to blame and being like, it was all their fault again. And then you just go into the next season and you do the same thing over again. I'm not talking about blaming your way into a new season of life. I'm talking about uncovering the unhealthy assumptions that you make about life, uncovering the unhealthy perspectives that you may or may not have so that you can actually begin living a transformed life, so that your mind can be renewed and your perspective can be refreshed and transformed. And so to help you do this, I'm going to lay out some unhealthy perspectives that I believe are commonplace. I've encountered these in my own life, and I've encountered these in the lives of people that I've had the privilege of talking life with. And these are perspectives that I would wager some of us have, and we just don't even know it. We don't realize that they're there. So some of these may apply to you. Some of them may not. Some of them may apply to the special someone in your life. So make sure you jot them down and you send them their way. But I'm asking you, don't apply these to somebody else. Hear them for yourself. Before you start trying to change somebody else's life, change yours. Be an adult. All right, here's the first one. As soon as I have fill in the blank with anything, I don't even care what it is. Fill in the blank with whatever you want. As soon as I have, I'll be satisfied. Could be a new house, new job, new spouse. Could be a new relationship, new pair of kicks, new pair of pants, new piece of technology, new phone, new whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. There's part of you that's convinced that as soon as you have it, you're going to be satisfied. Now, I want you to think about this with me for a second. Can you name one thing in your life that you've ever gotten that you were so deeply and perpetually satisfied by that you were just like, I'm done living. Just end it now, God. It's over. I mean, I've reached the pinnacle of satisfaction. Look, I'm not saying things don't make you smile or make you happy. I am with you. Things make me smile. Things make me happy. I like new shoes. But I am done with the lie that new shoes are going to satisfy me. That's just silly. I don't care how expensive or inexpensive the thing is. Eventually, the shoes get a scuff. The car gets a dent. The house burns down. Hopefully not. But you know where I'm going with this. It falls apart. It doesn't last forever, so stop telling yourself the lie. Now, hey, go ahead, buy it, lease it, put it on, wear it, swim in debt over it. But please stop telling yourself the lie that it's going to satisfy you, because it ain't. You know this. You've been alive for long enough to know this. I'm not even telling you anything you don't already know. Here's another one. My situation is unique. No, it ain't. Look, you are super unique. You are. Your situation is not. If you talk to enough people, you will find out that you are going through something that someone ages before went through, and so on and so forth. To think that some scenario or situation in your life is that unique, that it's the first time ever in the history of humanity, is the silliest thing that I have ever heard. But I'll tell you this, I've lived like that before. As silly as it is, I mean, I've been there. And as silly as it is, I would wager that in a crowd this big, some people are still there. Look, you are unique. Your situation is not. And when you start saying your situation is super unique and nobody's going to understand and wisdom, blah, 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 and whatever, here's what it is for you. It's just a loophole. It's a loophole for you to dodge the bullet of good advice. The advice that you actually need to make the progress that you want to make. All it is a loophole. Fill the loophole. Stop telling yourself the lie that your situation is unique. Look, and if that's not where you're at, if you know your situation is not unique, maybe this is where you're at. I know I'm not supposed to, but it makes me happy. This is a real good one. Look, I don't know what it is. I don't know what you're doing, what you were doing, what you're planning on doing. But if it's wrong, it's wrong. It's either right or wrong. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but wrong behavior never results in a happy ending. I mean, can it really make you happy if in your heart of hearts, you know it's wrong in the first place? Now, here's what I think happens when you operate with this mindset. The thing that you're doing, yeah, it's satisfying. It feels great while you're doing it. And then when it's over, tell me you ain't filled with shame and guilt, and I wish I didn't do that, and what was I thinking? And the only way to get over that is you have to go back and do the same thing over again. And so you're on this cycle, and the question becomes, when does the cycle end? Here's the last one. My secret is secure. Anybody out there got secrets? I'm here to tell you it ain't secure and it ain't healthy. Secrets are never secure and they're never healthy. And here's the reason why. A secret will always leak out onto the people that you care about the most. The secret will always rear its head right in the middle of your relationship. And so if you're planning on getting into a relationship and carrying your secret with you, that is the absolute worst thing you could bring to the table. If you're in a relationship and you're carrying a secret with you, that is the absolutely most unhealthy thing that you could do. Because here's the reality. Your secret porn addiction, or your secret alcohol addiction, or your secret whatever it is that you're doing that you know you're not supposed to be doing, what it eventually becomes, what it eventually creates is an unhealthy threesome in your marriage, in your relationship, and at a certain point, somebody has got to go. Because the three of you, your spouse, and your secret are not gonna live happily ever after. Secrets never produce security in a relationship, but they always produce insecurity. Because here's the reality. You will never clean up what you continue to cover up. You will never clean up what you cover up. So the most powerful thing you might do in the days that lie ahead, if this is where you're at, is just come clean. And I'll tell you this, it'll probably be the hardest thing that you do, but it'll be the most beneficial. It could be the most beneficial thing you do in the context of that relationship. And it might just be what you have to do in order to see the progress that you want to see in your life. Look, the progress you want, that I'm convinced that you want, that I want, it's not a matter of adding anything. It's not a matter of a new commitment or a deeper sincerity for something. It's not a matter of a resolution that's going to get your year started and then you're going to quit 20 minutes in. It's not a matter of setting a new goal or getting a new job. It's not a matter of adding anything new to your life. It's a matter of deleting something. It's a matter of deleting something. It's a matter of abandoning the unhealthy perspectives that have gotten you to where you are in the first place. It's a matter of transforming your perspective because, hear me on this, if you think like you always think, you're just gonna do what you always do. If you think the way that you always think, you're gonna do what you always do. If you want an outcome that's different than any outcome you've ever had, you're gonna have to do something that you've never done. You've gotta change the way that you think if you're gonna change the way that you live. Peter gets it. And he gets that it's hard to walk away, and he gets that you're gonna take heat when you start walking away from the people that you used to run with and you're not doing the things that you used to do. He gets it. Hear what he says in verse 4. He says, they are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. People don't like it. They don't like seeing you make progress. You're not always going to have a fan on your sideline. You're not always going to have a cheerleader. In order to get where you want to go, you're going to have to leave something behind. If you want to get through the middle where you are, somewhere between where you were and where you want to be, you're going to have to focus forward. You're going to have to keep one foot in front of the other. You're going to have to keep moving forward if you want to make progress. And the only way you're going to do this is with a fresh perspective. And you're going to have to spend time looking past the obstacles. You're going to have to see beyond your circumstances. And you're going to have to listen beyond your critic. And the only way you're going to do this is if you're holding tightly on to the perspective that Jesus is enough. And you keep one foot in front of the other and you keep moving forward. Don't focus on the judgment that you receive or the heat that you take from people who don't even know where you're trying to go in the first place or don't understand what you're trying to do. Focus on Jesus. Don't focus on what you have or what you don't have. Focus on what Jesus has already done. Jesus is enough. And hear me on this. The Messiah has the final word, not the mocker. The Messiah has the final word, not the mocker. Listen to verses 5 and 6. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit. Look, here's what this means. The voice of the mocker will never outlast the voice of the Messiah. It means that Jesus is enough to get you through this life despite the circumstances, despite the evidence that you're losing the battle, you're losing ground, that you can't, that you don't have enough, that you want to give up. Despite all of that, this means that Jesus is enough to get you through it. It means that each time that you decide to focus forward and move further away from the life that you were living and deeper into the life that Jesus has for you, despite how difficult it might be or what it might cost you, it's going to be worth it. Because Jesus is enough, and in Jesus, the best is yet to come. It means that even though in this life we may be stripped of absolutely everything that is perceived as valuable, we already have absolutely everything that we need to be successful because Jesus is enough. And as the worship team comes up, I want to show you something that we see Jesus saying. It's in John chapter 6. And it's a couple days after he had fed the 5,000. And there were some people, after Jesus left the one area, they followed him to where he went. And they approached Jesus with a question. And the question was this. They were like, Jesus, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do to distinguish yourself from people who've come before you? What are you going to do to set yourself apart, to prove yourself to us? And then they say, Moses. They rewinded all the way back to Moses, and God's people are moving through the wilderness, and they're in the middle. They're in that awkward place between where they were, slavery in Egypt, and where they're going, the promised land. And God's providing for them, and they don't see it all the time. But they go back to that and they say, Moses gave our ancestors bread from heaven. Now hear this, Jesus responds and says, hashtag, you don't even know what you're talking about. Moses didn't give them bread from heaven. My Father gives bread from heaven. I am that bread from heaven. I am enough. He says, I am the bread from heaven that has come to give life to the world. You are part of the world. Jesus came to give you a life that you've never even begun to dream about. And it starts with your perspective. You see, when those people zoomed in on manna from heaven, they were zooming in on something that they believed could produce a level of satisfaction. And for us, it's not bread, it's something else. It's probably a person or a possession or a position that we're looking to feel like we matter. And Jesus is giving us a perspective that's far greater than that. He's saying, I am enough. And look, until Jesus is enough in your life, nothing will ever be enough. You will perpetually live a dissatisfied life. You'll continue to look for enough in all the places that we know, all the places that we tend to look. You'll continue on the exhaustive cycle, and you're just gonna come out tired and torn. You don't have to live life like that. Until Jesus is enough, you're never gonna feel like you have enough regardless of how much you have. I have yet to find a story of someone saying, you know what? That's the dollar amount. That's all you need, not a penny more, and if you get that, it's over. No one on record has ever said that. There are some cats running around with a lot of cake in their pocket, and they're not saying that. You always need one more. You always want one more, and you're always gonna go after one more. Until Jesus is enough, no amount of anything will ever be enough. Until Jesus is enough, you won't see that you have enough. But when Jesus becomes enough for you, you'll see that you have enough. You'll see that all your needs have been met. There's nothing to earn, there's nothing to prove. And that's when you're gonna experience true freedom. True freedom will not come for you outside of being deeply and fully satisfied in Jesus. And here's what this is gonna mean for you. You'll find contentment in all circumstances. Whether your hands are full or they're empty, whether you're fed or you're starving on a street corner, whether you have everything or you have nothing, whether you have the right job or the wrong job, whether you have the right spouse or the wrong spouse, regardless of your circumstance, you will feel like you have enough. You'll be just as happy with little as you are with much. You'll be able to make it through anything because of the one that makes you who you are. Jesus is enough. Amen.